Hello and welcome to the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I'm your host, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada. And today we have a little bit of a different show for you. I'm joined by Jim Love. He leads the hashtag trending podcast here in Canada. It's one that I've listened to on the weekends and the mornings when I'm getting ready. So I'm really excited to have Jim on. And today what we're going to do with the 2024 cloud report that's launching here over the next week. I want to do a little bit of a reversing the script, and Jim's going to talk to me and ask me some questions about the cloud report. So Jim, if you could maybe introduce yourself. I know you've got hashtag trending, you've got the weekend show, you're a busy guy with a bunch of different hats. If you could tell me a little bit more about kind of what you're doing, and then we can get into it.
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff. I started out, I was an IT guy for 20 years in industry. I started in consulting with Ernst & Young, ended up heading up a tech consulting practice at DMR, worldwide practice. Then I left that, started my own consulting, and then got into publishing, which not exactly a great career move in many cases in terms of you want to make a lot of money. But I have this passion for telling the story about technology, and that's sort of kept with it. So I'm still an IT guy, still for hire. Anybody out there? I'm still working, but I've got these podcasts, and I just can't let them go. It's a great way to talk to it. Well, you know what I'm talking about. It's a great way to relate to an audience. It keeps you on your toes because you have to keep up with everything, and it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I find that I learn a lot. I learn a lot from the people I talk to. I learn a lot from prepping for the different sessions I'm doing, and kind of what you and I were talking about before we started recording. Everything just changes so quickly. And I guess if I had to go hands on keyboard, maybe Exchange 5.5 or maybe some old Windows 2000 domain controllers, I could maybe throw my hat in for some of that consulting work too. But yeah, no, it's great. I really appreciate you doing this. Like I said, I definitely enjoy the hashtag trending. And I enjoy, what you and I were talking about before. I enjoy the fact that you really focus in on the technology and not really the financial side of the business unless it's a really, really big deal. So we've tried to do the same sort of thing here.
Yeah, which I think is great. And thanks for saying that, because I do consciously stay away from the financial data because I think my audience is a tech audience. And I'll tell you where the inspiration for this comes from, and I'm sure that you'll relate to this, is I learned, I went to university, I took courses, I did all those things. You know where I learned the most? What we used to call chalk talk. And that's, there'd be some people around the data center, and many of them, or in the development area, many of them were people that had sort of, they're quiet, they didn't say very much. But if you could get them talking, you could learn so much. I mean, there's one guy, Ted, and I've forgotten his last name. It's just terrible because it's been a couple decades, taught me everything about how to move a data center while he was bouncing his own plans off of me. And so I hope that's the style that I keep with the podcast. I think you're probably aiming for the same things. I listen to you as well. So the idea is to have that conversation, that chalk talk, and be able to share that with people who are doing this every day, or, and I'm not an IT snob, or people who want to participate at a different level.
Yeah, and that's where it's been interesting, because I think a lot of what we deal with is pretty high level. Like we talk about the cloud report and the survey set that we do. We'll kind of talk about it a little bit, but it tends to be a bit of a crystal ball or a bit of a view. If you're front lines with IT, it's a bit of a view into what your CEO, your CIO, your CISO, what they're thinking about. So. Yeah, so let's go ahead and kind of start. I know you had some questions around the cloud report. Happy to sort of jump in and talk about that and see if we can bring up some of the interesting insights that we're going to be publishing here shortly.
Yeah, and first of all, good report. I have to say that it's nice and refreshing. There's a lot of studies that are happening in technology, and some, not all, but some I find have a little suspicion of. So it's nice when you reach out to a firm like IDC and you work with somebody who's really got some good statistical data. And I always ask, we read these things to get an idea of what other people are thinking. And so the more accurate you can get it is there. So I want to start with some of the surprises I had reading the report, because I did this whole thing as well of a CIO census when I was at IT World for over a decade. And so I got used to some trends. Here's one that just, and it comes up, the shifts in digital infrastructure in the report. There's very little cloud growth going on, at least in people's expectations. It's almost like we've come to a standstill, or at least to a halt for a while, because for years it was growing like mad.
Hmm.
And the and I think I still remember about 2015. I was talking to one guy who said, or probably maybe a little earlier than that, but told me, he came to my meetings on cloud and some of the sessions I do so he could find a way to defend against it. And then about 2 years later, he comes back and he's back and I meet him again in Calgary. And he says, I need to know how to make it work now. Yeah. So even the people who are most against it gave up. But we've now hit a point, at least according to the study data, you're predicting growth of maybe 1 or 2%. So what do you think is accounting for that? Did you get an insight into that yourself?
Yeah. And so what's interesting is it's a bit of a continuation of a trend that we saw in 2023. And you're right, like what we found is the commitment to moving workloads into the cloud or running workloads in the cloud only grew from like 38 to 39% between 2023 and 2024. We saw the largest growth really in private cloud investment. And so I think what's happened is a lot of organizations have realized that the goal of really using cloud to save money is not really panning out for them, at least the way they expected it to. And so what's happening is there's a slowdown of migration into public cloud services. There's actually a transition from one public cloud service to another public cloud service, which obviously keeps people busy, but doesn't necessarily grow the share of workloads that are in the public cloud. And what's happened is organizations have realized that there's certain applications and workloads that really just run better at the edge, or they run better on premises in the data center, or they want to take advantage of the cloud operating model and optimize the way that those workloads are being managed and the observability. But they're going to do that with a private cloud solution rather than a public cloud solution. So I think there's still workloads moving to the public cloud, but there's also been some workloads that have been repatriated back into the data center.
Yeah, and I'd love to do a deeper dive into this at one point or other. We should talk about collaborating on this, because I'd like to find out where those pockets are, because I've got a couple of ideas. One is, there was a whole pile of old technology in companies that, instead of renewing it, they went to cloud. It was a simple thing. I think that's one place where we got a big growth. Where I would say that just the non-heart of the organization or core applications. And I think they were easier to get rid of, and even some other companies. I think the one that I can't track through this, though, is there's a whole lot of cloud that just happens as shadow IT, bought on a credit card. I don't even know if that turns up on these surveys. So we could have a lot more growth in things like that. So if somebody goes to OpenAI, I'm sure we'll talk about AI, or we'll both get our podcaster card removed. But OpenAI and things like that are really probably not classed as cloud in many cases. So there may be hidden growth in there. And the other one is, and I hang out with a lot of CIOs whenever I can, and I've sat there with people sitting going, the cost is just like, the cost of cloud is growing more than we thought it would. And, part of that's a wake-up call. A lot of people said, you're not doing this to save money. Some people, I think, sold it on a save money basis and may have come to a halt. And then the fourth piece for me is technical debt. Older systems you just can't convert. And I think Canada has all too much of that. So those are my four areas where I think we may have hit that pocket that is just much more difficult to move.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on some things there. I think, when we look at that technical debt and we look at retiring it, as an IT professional, we always use the term compelling event. We really needed a compelling event. We needed a point where we were going to have to reinvest in the hardware, be it the storage platforms or the server infrastructure, or we're going to reinstall the application. And we realized, okay, well, let's look and see if we have an as a service or if there's a SaaS model. And I think where we've seen a lot of success is really with SaaS services. Nobody is reinstalling Exchange and moving their mail services back on premises. Once people start to use ServiceNow or Salesforce. So so when you look at things like OpenAI, or Azure AI services or Anthropic and Claude, people are leveraging those services really as sort of that private cloud or as a service offering, which is really interesting. And I think again, we see a lot of value there. But those also scale and then shrink, as needed, which is really important. Whereas I think as you make a great point, that technical debt, those mainframes or those AS400s or those very, very complex systems that run all the time, maybe that has critical data or risky data, those become really, really hard to move to the cloud. And then we also have like the data gravity or the services gravity, which once you have that one key system that you can't move to the public cloud, but you've got 10 other systems that are tied to it. Now all of a sudden those systems can't move to the cloud either. So I think you're right. I think we sort of capped out. But one of the really interesting things that kind of came out of the report was leveraging, a different public cloud provider to start to reduce the cloud spend. And I think that's part of why we've seen the need to have somebody that's focused on FinOps. And so having a financial operations person looking at your public cloud, and that's a role that still most organizations don't have filled. So that becomes a challenge too.
Yeah, and I think as part of, if there is a pause in this or whatever in this cloud movement, it's really a good opportunity to start to try to figure out how to manage cloud.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, we took the easy shots. Exchange server, do you really want to run an Exchange server? Do you really want to do that in-house? No, you don't. And every CIO in the world knows that when email goes down or the phone system goes down, their life becomes miserable. So passing off email is an easy one. And I as I do the cybersecurity podcast as well, Columbus, Ohio went down. And one of the comments I got back from, because a couple of people, I get occasional people will just give me an anonymous tip on something that's happening. And the guy's sitting, why are they still managing their email, their Microsoft Exchange internally? And it's fair. So getting rid of the stuff that you don't want to run is an easy shot. But then managing your cloud is a new skill. The guys who developed FinOps, I have a lot of respect for the people who started to really develop the skills of managing cloud, both financially and I think operationally there should be an equal effort made, and I hope to see that. And that's, I think, is the big growth area that's pointed out by the study. Is that's a place where people really need to manage it. So when you get to this idea of two different cloud providers, one of the problems is cloud providers are a bit like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you want. You just can't leave. It's really hard to move between the different cloud providers. So, that's one reluctance that people have, I think, in terms of moving. It's a big deal. But the other piece, and I think this came up, I'm dying to talk to you about this, because I think it was, in terms of management, there's two models you could have. One is, you can split yourself among several cloud providers and try and manage the best of those, the best of breed model, supposedly. If Azure has a certain cost structure for this thing, and maybe AWS has this, and maybe somebody else has this, then you pass them around. The problem with that one, though, is integration. How do you deal with the integration of those things? But the second one is, if you're going to go after this and say, and this is a non-sexy alternative, but I had a guy who was working with it at a mining company. I think I can say it was Encode at that point. And he did the most non-sexy thing possible. he insisted everybody has the same laptop. That was it. And do you know how much, like, and everybody hates standardization, but do you know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars they saved by standardization? Because you only had to teach one thing, and anybody who's getting a help desk call, they learn how to operate one PC, how to save one PC, how to find their way around it, and they saved a ton of money. So I'm always wondering about which one is the not the best, but I think strategically the people see the world in those aspects. I don't know. Do you get that feeling from reading the report that people are attacking this strategically?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, the first comment I want to make is I really wish that people were as patient with me as an IT admin as they seem to be when Office 365 has an issue. Because to your point, that would be an immediate email or a phone call the moment, hey, I sent this email and it didn't show up 30 seconds later. Yeah, and there's actually a really interesting case study with, I think, Southwest Airlines out of the US, where not only did they standardized on a single plane. And so, when you think about the logistics of standardization and how that can really drive value, there's an interesting story about how that standardization led to all sorts of business optimizations for them. So I can definitely see the value in standardizing on, whether it's endpoint. I think what's happened with the best of breed solution, and I think where organizations have really tried to take that on, the strategic piece that's missing really comes down to systems management and observability, and so a lot of the conversations we have with customers is the sort of best of breed, and you think about the way that spans across multiple clouds. Well, maybe you shouldn't be managing that firewall as a cloud native firewall in each of those public. Like maybe you don't need to have, an Azure web application firewall and then an AWS web application firewall. Maybe you should be using a third party tool that works consistently across both of those public clouds. Oh, and hey, by the way, you already have that in your data center and you probably have the capabilities on your bench to manage that. So I think to your point, yes, I think strategically, what has happened as organizations have realized that they're going to be in this hybrid infrastructure world where they are leveraging public cloud services, they are leveraging SaaS services, and they're going to be leveraging services either on premises or in a colo or at the edge, is that you start to look at tools and be, and with intent that can span those environments and then ease the burden on your teams, but also give you consistency from a compliancy perspective. If you've got different tools all over the place, how do you go to your compliancy team and say, yeah, well, we have this data management or these security capabilities in this cloud, and then it's completely different over here, and our on-premises is very different. And then that holistic management, it is very, very enticing. To your point, that the challenge there is that not only do you have the sort of lock-in of the cloud provider, but we had Henrik Gudel on from Azure, the Azure Business Group in Microsoft last year on the podcast. And one of the insights that I took away from that conversation was it's not that we're technically locked into the cloud. It's even harder to deal with because our teams are now locked into the cloud. We've got a team that has capabilities and they've got skills that are focused in on that cloud provider. And so, when you start building development teams that have native cloud skill sets, you're not just talking about, moving workloads. You're talking about retraining or rebuilding an entire team, which is obviously way more challenging than picking up a virtual machine and moving it from one place to the other.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think that is one of the other big barriers. And I'm not picking on cloud providers when I say it's hard to move between them. They develop their stuff based on what they want to do, and your knowledge of them is really important. Like if you go through Azure, I worked with a guy who was an Azure licensing expert, and the money that gets left on the table because people make stupid mistakes They have too many. They start spinning up servers. They don't take them down. They don't take advantage of things. And I'm sure it's the same in AWS. Sure, it's the
Mhm.
same in Google. I'm sure it's the same everywhere. You need skills to manage this, and that's the one great thing I think is pointed out in your report is that we're starting to recognize that this shouldn't be an accident. However
Mhm.
you're going to manage your hybrid cloud should not be an accident. It should be a strategic intention, and you should be looking to how you're going to have the internal ability to manage the expense, the service, and the growth of that potential. And I think that's we talk about the halted growth, but I think when you actually dig through your report, there's an indication that people are getting much more serious about managing cloud and making that a real job and a real skill and a strategic intent. And you use the word intent. I love that because I think that's what you need to have.
Yeah, I absolutely, and I think what ends up happening is organizations, are smarter with their investments. They are now realizing that cloud is not a panacea. It's not going to solve all their challenges, but they get a lot of value out of it. I still think that one of the only reasons we're not talking about the innovation within the cloud as much as we used to is just because AI is innovating so quickly. But there is still a lot of innovation that's happening that's driving value, in the public cloud space. And so yeah, I think having that portability is going to be a key differentiator. IDC likes to talk about the digitization of the business, and organizations that can digitize faster, that can make those workloads more portable, that are leveraging those consistent management tools for agility. They can get the benefit of one public cloud, but the flexibility to move to another, or back on premises, or vice versa, kind of almost in real time. But you're right. I think that retooling effort does slow down the migration to public cloud. So whether we're plateaued because of a feasibility, or whether we're plateaued because the organizations are retooling with the proper skills, that's something we'll definitely have to kind of keep an eye on in the future.
Well, the skill thing is a big deal, and I'll
Hmm.
go to cybersecurity, and it's probably the number one thing that concerns everybody. It goes through this report. It goes through every report. You inherit with, I would say, I dare say, any of the serious public cloud providers, and many of the private or the smaller organizations out there. There are a number of them. You get better security than on a technical basis
Hmm.
than you could deliver yourself. I think that's a gimme. But you also have to manage it, because for every one of those things where you built the most great technical security infrastructure in the world, if somebody leaves that storage with a password that is easy to guess, or does any of those human things that we do that create the vulnerabilities, then we've lost all the technical capability. And I think so I think, again, it goes back to that. We need that skill of managing and of taking the accountability for the human aspect of our organizations. And that's a big deal as well.
Yeah, and what I found really interesting is, talking with Ivo Weens, our field CTO for cybersecurity, and our security team, and also with the security study that we do annually. One of the things that came out of that is really that, to your point, yes, organizations do have a better security posture within the public cloud. A lot of the challenges that organizations have, though, is then they break that security posture to do things in the public cloud the same way they would have done it on premises. And so all of a sudden, it's a bunch of any rule sets for passing traffic, and they've actually taken that zero trust framework that the cloud started with, and then they've broken it. And so yeah, so you're right. I think, like most of the things we do, it comes down to the way in which we manage it, and the way in which we keep things secure, but also simplified, and then leveraging it in the best way possible. So again, I think part of that comes back just to tools. And again, to expect a medium-sized organization to have an Azure security expert, a Google Cloud security expert, an AWS security expert, and security experts that are focused on their tooling that they have in their data center at the edge, on their endpoints. That's really, really challenging. And so, where you can create consistency, I think you can, you have the opportunity to get the most out of the different public cloud providers, but with a as simplified a management toolkit as possible.
Yeah, and your report points out a couple of things where people are trying to manage the hybrid cloud with trying to find, I forget what the name that they give it, but really it's looking for that single pane of glass. It's looking for one way to manage all of this. And I think that's one of the things that we get into. And again, for our technical staff, and I think you pointed it out, is that it's don't dispute the people. About it. That's the most difficult part to get to manage. They need to know how to manage this. They need to be able to do it well. They need to be able to serve your organization, and those are your people. And I guess there's a possibility of outsourcing that, but I always regard outsourcing. If you don't think of outsourcing as one of the most critical relationships you're going to have, then you've done it wrong. So even if they're an outsourcer, you better know that relationship really well.
Yeah, and that's really led to, it's interesting. We have a managed services team, and one of the big changes we've seen, and I don't know if cloud has really driven this, but I think what you're talking about, that relationship has really driven the change that I've seen there, is we have a whole team that's focused on customer success. And so it becomes almost the customer's continuous improvement voice within our organization, to continually improve and find gaps and then mitigate those gaps, not just from a security perspective, just from an operations perspective. And so yeah, you're right. And so, anytime you have trends like that fundamentally change the way an organization works, I think it's a good thing, because we're innovating for the right reasons. But you're right, we're doing that because there needs to be that sort of in lockstep relationship working together.
Yeah, I was in one of your offices one time hanging out with somebody, and there was nobody there in the office. I said, working from home? They said, no, they're clients. These are relationships, and I think that's, people get lost in that very easily in the tech business. It's a relationship business, especially with outsourcing, and I think that's hugely important. But all of these things, the one thing I wanted to talk to you about as well was data, because I think that's another thing that comes up in terms of, man, it just hits in every part of the study, is this idea that we ran into a danger when we started to bring in the shadow IT, and it's not because I'm an IT guy who likes to dump on people for bringing in shadow IT. It's that we turned what we spent from about 1990 to about, I don't know, 2010, bringing all the systems together and trying to get architectures and data architecture so we could actually take advantage of the data we do. We could do all those things we talked about and mine the value in our data. And then we started to pop these out into little cloud pockets and things like that. And all of a sudden we've got all these islands again. And I think that may be another place where everybody's sort of held back a little bit, because in the report too, if you take a look at one of the answers, the number 3 thing that people want to do over the next 2 years is expand their cloud footprint. Their desire to do that is bigger than their ability to move it. And I suspect part of that is trying to get a data architecture so we can finally mine this data. I think that's a big piece. Are you hearing the same thing from people?
Yeah. One of the key findings out of the report is this sort of refocusing on data management. And what's interesting is, as I was just noting, it really comes down to 3 primary motivations there: security, so securing the data; privacy, maintaining the privacy or the anonymity of some of the data, because it's risky or potentially harmful data if misused, and the other is quality. And I think there's a couple of things that work against organizations. I think you touch on one of them, which is data silos that have sort of sprung up with public cloud environments. The other is not having the data where you need it. And you think about, especially with AI tooling, not having the data where your AI tools means now I've got a project to get the data there. And so I'm almost, I'm preceding my valuable project with a huge make work project to move all of that data around. And so, where we talk to organizations is, well, let's look at data portability. And so not just with your security tools, but across your potentially multiple public clouds, your on-premises data center, or your co-location, your edge. Let's look at tooling and technologies that can make that data more portable, and so that you can move it to where you need it, and then run it in real time. We used to have this, just-in-time mentality where we would move data, we'd use it, and then maybe we'd just discard the data. But as cloud providers are innovating very quickly, they're building tools that we want to take advantage of. And so not only do you have to have that data portability, you have to look at, okay, look, we need to curate all of the risky data out of that data set, or we need to anonymize data sets so that we're not including things that might be reputationally at risk, or we just did a podcast with the federal government. Obviously what they're doing with data is critical. And so, as we look at not just our data, but other data sets, how do we correlate those? Having a framework, having a risk and governance and compliancy framework, having an AI data management framework, all of those things are sort of foundational, and a lot of organizations don't have those yet. So that's where we're starting a lot of conversations with organizations. Well, let's build the plan for your data, and then let's start looking at, well, how do we train your people? How do we create the internal business processes that'll align with that framework? And then let's start looking at the technology. I think it's really easy to jump to the technology because I can put in a credit card and we can go. But a lot of it comes down to having a plan and then having the processes developed. But yeah, data management is huge.
And I hope that's the level of maturity we've reached, is that we've talked about this. Data's the new oil. Data's our value. It's only data. That's, I find it terrible that we stopped calling it data processing, because we lost the biggest word in it. Information technology, okay, then data information, and that transformation of data to information that you can use in some way is what it's all about. And I think hopefully with a lot of the things that are talked about in this report, I think maybe people are getting to a level of maturity. There's at least an opportunity to take that level of maturity. And I guess, we have to talk about it sooner or later. AI is going to force that. Mm-hmm. And because if you don't attack AI strategically, you're gonna pay a penalty, in the same way that if you don't attack your cloud strategies with a real strategic intent and an understanding what you want to get out of it, you can boil the ocean so easily. You can build up all these things, you can buy all these tools, you can have all these great things, and no result. Mm-hmm. And I think, AI is going to be that way, data's that way, and then the two of them will go together. But if we don't stop and start thinking about what are we trying to do, one of the classic things in data people always talk about is how much dark data is out there. It's 80%, it's 70%, it's whatever, how much dark data is out there in the world. The only dark data that you're interested in is the stuff you can use. So maybe it's dark for a reason because you're not using it, or it's abandoned because you've got silo problems, but all of those things, before you invest in trying to save all your dark data, understand whether there's anything there you can use, and strategically. So if we start from that point of view and we have that maturity and we're looking at cloud that way, I think we're in good stead. I honestly think we've turned to a new level of maturity.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something that's really important there. And I think when we think about that dark data could be dark because we really haven't had tooling to look at it previously. So that's where I think a lot of organizations have stockpiled data. And they say, you know what, we're just going to save this information for when we have something that can take advantage of it. We feel like there's a use case. Again, my background's mining. You mentioned, Inco earlier. we always had, terabytes and terabytes of core samples and just in case you're not in mining, because most people aren't, core samples really looking at the mineral makeup at different levels within the ground, and you're looking, in our case, we were looking for gold, but you could potentially take that data that is sitting there, as you point out, as waiting to be drilled and tapped into, and you could maybe create a modeling software that would model ore bodies more effectively, and when you think about your organizations, what sort of data is sitting around that if it was just more readily accessible, or if you could see patterns in the data that maybe a person doesn't find, but an AI model can, what types of value could you bring out of that? So I think that there's data that some organizations have as dark data they've just been compiling. But the add-on to your analogy that data is the new oil, is that oil is in its in that sort of state is not as useful, but when we refine it into gasoline, all of a sudden that becomes very, very useful. And so the interesting thing is as we spend more time with our data becomes more valuable. And then you get back to, well, how are we managing it? How are we safeguarding it? How are we building resiliency? How are we keeping hackers from exfiltrating that data? So yeah, it's one of those things where organizations are going to be spending more time with their data. Their data is going to become more tied into the value stream for their organization. It's going to be differentiation for them from their competitors, and it's going to be more valuable, and so they're going to have to worry about safeguarding it even more. So yeah, if you start by just making it really valuable, but you don't have the security and the governance and all of the controls around it, you may make something very valuable that becomes somebody else's, commodity, which is not what you want. So really starting with, good frameworks, building the processes, training your people, making sure they're not oversharing. To your point earlier, making sure that you're configuring your security products appropriately, or working with a partner that can, because and then invest in your data once you have that secure environment for it. The other thing with AI is how are you going to measure it? Not having a good measurement tool can really provide challenges later on as well, because you may be seeing success. Yeah, you may be seeing success, but then you're not measuring the right thing.
Yeah. Lately I do a lot of AI strategies with companies, and one of the things I talk to them about right off the bat is forget about AI.
Yeah.
Like, stop. Don't even think about it. Whatever you want to do technically, I'll find a way to do it. Don't worry about that. What do you want to get out of this? And you talk about old mining experience. We used to get, everybody in IT got beat up because we were a cost center, and all that sort of stuff. We weren't strategic. We weren't a partner. I worked at Inco with a mine manager, Jim Gowans, and he was just fabulous. And his mantra for us is, I got $1,000, guys. I can spend it on, invest it over here in this technical piece. I can invest it in getting some more ore out of the ground, or I can invest it in you. Tell me why I should invest it in you. I love it when you can have that discussion. And AI is the same way. You tell me what you want to do, and we'll find a way to leverage AI if it's possible. And if it's not, we'll use something else. But that is, I think, is going to be the discipline that everybody gets to. And the measuring is so important. This is good. I actually will get to a point. One of the reasons we could convince a hard-nosed guy like Jim Gowan was we did a benchmark. We said, here's where we are today. We can measure that. Here's where we're going to get to by doing this, and we can measure that as well. And here's how we're going to get there. After that point, he relaxed and said, okay, that's good. We can invest in that. And I think people forget that. They aim for, it's going to be so good. We'll go to this, we'll get these results. And they go to a CFO who's sitting there with a pile of business cases on their desk. And I've actually had guys tell me this, I got a pile of business cases here, and they all tell me that if we did all that stuff, we'd have zero costs and we'd be making billions. Said something's wrong. So you have to first measure where you are, and if you can't do that, don't do anything else. Second thing is set a goal for where you want to be in
Hmm.
terms of business, and now we can actually see. And so when I'm just going back on the AI thing, is I'm telling people start small,
Hmm.
build little things. Do like this cloud. We started cloud the same way. We started small. We built up. I think we got maybe got, and we always get overbuilt. We always get ahead of our skis. And now your report, it really seems to be reflecting the fact that we're getting a little more strategic. This we now
Hmm.
know that cloud. You've got cloud management is a separate skill. Rings through this report. Managing your data rings through this report. So we'll be more strategic. We shouldn't make the same mistake with AI of getting that far ahead of our skis. We should really focus on measurable business achievements. But I got to tell you, I could do this 100 times, and I'm sure some people listen and they're successful. The one thing I got right, I got one thing right, and that is measure where you are, agree on how you measured it, and then
Hmm.
talk about where you want to go and how you're going to measure that. Huge piece of that we could all benefit from.
Yeah, and the thing that really resonated with me, so James Scott is the field TTO over at Dell here in Canada, and I heard him present a couple months back, and one of the things that I took out of his presentation was we're not talking about a proof of concept. We're not even really talking about a proof of value with AI. We're talking about a proof of productivity. We want to take a business outcome. We want to optimize the way that business outcome is going to be delivered. And then we want to measure the value of the tool or the agent or the chatbot that we've created by how much productivity is it, say, how many hours a day per person that's using that tool are they saving? And if we measure things that way, then we have a benchmark, and we say, okay, well, what did the tool cost us? What is it optimizing? Is that allowing our people to be more focused on our customers? Is that allowing our people to be more focused on what the business needs? Has it freed us up to be more effective? And I think that's really powerful. And I think the opportunity with AI is when we look at the report, 55% of organizations have an active either traditional AI or generative AI project going on. What I look at that is I look at, sort of frontline IT people. You and I both were in those roles at one point in our career. I look at those frontline IT people and I say, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity really for you to get engaged with the business, because you're going to say, hey, what is the outcome that you're looking at achieving here? And then you're going to be able to look at, AI through agents, through chatbots, traditional AI, computer vision, all sorts of options there to then drive that business value for the organization that you report
Yep.
into. So I think it's a huge opportunity.
It is, and it's an opportunity for us not to make the same mistake that we sometimes make, was we want to say, okay, the business wants to do this, we got to build a big foundation first. And we got to be
Yeah.
able to handle everything and anything. And it's got to be perfect. And that's the way we're going to go. And if we don't do that, then we're going to do nothing.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, that alienates us from the business. I
Hmm.
get it. I know why we do it, but it's just not going to work. You've got to go to them and say, what are you trying to do? How can we make that
Hmm.
better? How can we build to get there? Because, you know, and goes back to your report. Some people are going to have the hybrid cloud. Some people are going to have a single cloud. Some people are going to have different elements of this. And if they've done it strategically and they know why they did it and it serves their business objectives, it's perfect. On the other hand, you could build out the most massive cloud or IT infrastructure and go and get all that dark data and make it available to everybody and have all the fights and all those sorts of things to make your governance structure built, and then discover nobody uses it. Uh, because it really wasn't all that valuable. And we have to bridge between the people in the business, on the forefront of the business. We're all in the business,
Hmm.
the forefront of the business, who are just trying to get something done, and us who know we have to make this reliable, secure, and making sure that it operates every day. And that, so that if we can get out there and get those ideas of outcomes, I think we'll do a lot better. Um,
Yeah, but you touched on something earlier, and I think what it does require a bit of a mindset change is that it's very different defending a budget and having a run rate budget from year after year, and IT as really a cost center, part of your G&A, that's a very, very different interaction with the business than selling the business case and showing ROI and working with the business to build and innovate. That those are very, very different skills that are needed, and it's a very, very different conversation. The opportunity here, though, is that it allows IT to engage in those conversations and then show that pathway forward. It also allows you, rather than being in competition with those other business cases, it allows you to partner with different parts of the business. Maybe you're partnering with your accounting department. Maybe you're partnering with your sales department. Maybe you're partnering with your technical department that is more tied in with what the business is trying to accomplish in that value stream. And so IT can not only bring those projects forward, but because they're outcome focused and there's a beneficiary of that outcome, you can then have that team that's going to benefit be an ally in those discussions.
So I'm going to commit the ultimate heresy here for an IT guy or an IT broadcaster. And I'm not going to talk about AI for my final point with you, and that is. And because we were talking about when you use things on an outcome basis, you can really make a difference. And in your report, and if people haven't read the report, they should read it just for this. There's a lot of other great stuff in it, but it blew me away that IoT had suddenly become mature. Mm-hmm. And I think that because when I was doing surveys like over the past decade, I believe my technical term for it was you could tie a pork chop around its neck and the dog wouldn't play with it. That was IoT. Nobody had any idea. And now suddenly it's exploded, at least in terms of this report. And I think that's because we talk about edge computing. People are finding creative ways to use the data in a real sense and in a real business outcome sense. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's happened. And it, like I said, it astonished me. 95% are using IoT. And now if we can merge that with the OT world and get benefit from that, we're away. So there you go. My last point for you was not AI. They'll be coming for me soon.
Just take that podcast license away. Yeah, and so a couple of things you touched on I think are really important there. The first thing is 95% of organizations are using some sort of IoT, in their business process. One of the challenges that we're seeing is only about a third, 35% of organizations are really seeing the value of using IoT. And so while the projects seem to have gotten investment, the projects either aren't aligned with a good business outcome, maybe they didn't identify a good use case initially, or it's not delivering on that use case, or maybe, as we just sort of mentioned with AI, maybe they're measuring the value incorrectly, and so I kind of have to look at how are you gauging the real impact to the business. And the second thing you mentioned there is the IT OT integration. We're having a lot of conversations with organizations about how do we tie in security, how do we really manage better our OT systems and bring zero trust into those rather than rely on sort of the Purdue model to secure those environments. And so that's an area of huge interest with our customers that we're talking to and organizations, and in part because it's better security practices and it's improving that, and it's benefiting from economies of scale and being leverage your IT systems rather than have multiple networks. I mean, you and I back in the day, we had closed circuit television on one network, we had our OT on a different network, we had our IT on a third network, and then we probably had radios, we had all sorts of other systems out there. Now most of that's running across the IT infrastructure, but we need to help secure it because you've got legislation coming from the Canadian government around critical IT infrastructure in Canada. It's going to apply a lot of the mandates and legislation to parts of industry that really hasn't had formal rules in place. So when we start talking about transit and logistics and shipping, or energy, or food production, all of those things are going to be more scrutinized as we go forward. And so that IT/OT convergence, the cybersecurity wrapper around that, having that framework, having the governance, and then having the technology and the processes is all going to be key. But yeah, I think IoT. Whether it's smart retail, whether it's better use of our office spaces, even tying in computer vision and things like that. I think we're maybe struggling a little bit because we're not measuring the right things, or we don't have a game plan to measure the right things.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But that increase, even to 35% piece, that increase is big, and it's an area to watch. And my silent prayer for everybody is do this strategically. Start with outcomes here too.
Yeah.
Because I think when we start to put the outcomes together, we'll figure out the things we should pursue. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say I'm a liar now, because AI is going to allow you to sort through that data.
You ended with AI, so you saved it.
Yeah, I had to. Geez, they were coming for me. I couldn't. I broke down. This has been fantastic. Can I get you to summarize what you took away from this report? I took a lot away from it.
Yeah, and thanks again for jumping in and doing this, Jim. Jim Love, #trending. Like I said, I generally catch it in the mornings or on the weekends. The longer format show, the weekend show is really good. So really, appreciate you jumping in on this. I'll sort of touch on a couple of key findings we saw in the report. If listeners are interested, they can download the report at cdw.ca. It'll be live here in about a week and a half from the time of this recording. So probably the second week of September, for sure. So please take a look for it there. When we break down the key findings, digital infrastructure, we talked about that a little bit. The need to digitize processes, digitize workloads, and really being able to create, portability, better manageability of those systems. Seeing a small public cloud uptick, but it's the smallest it's been over the last few years. And most of the growth that we saw in investment in different workloads is really across private cloud. So people like the cloud operating model. There's been a little bit of a repatriation of certain workloads. There's been continued migration of workloads to the public cloud, but that's definitely been a bit of a struggle. Hybrid multi-cloud, more organizations, about 60% of organizations will be spread across multiple public clouds. And then most of those organizations don't have good cross-cloud management. And so that sort of leads us into our third key finding, which is really have a plan for multi-cloud management. Look at tools that can provide consistency. When you're looking at automation tools, look at automation tools that work across your on-premises data center, at the edge, in the various public cloud providers. That's going to be key. And then observability, because you as an IT, whether you're a CEO, a CIO, whether you're a CISO, VP, director, whether you're a frontline worker, it doesn't matter. You need visibility across all of those different environments. So looking at observability tools, looking at bringing those into your SIM, creating proactive alerts, finding outages before they happen, and then I'm gonna save AI for the end so I don't lose my podcast license. Data management, securing it. Looking at the private data that's in there, curating it, and then fundamentally, improving the quality. So, you started with oil, you refined it into gasoline. Now it's a real powerhouse for the business. IoT, as you mentioned, Jim, 95% of organizations have IoT projects that they've executed, but if only a third of them are really seeing the value, we either need to refocus and talk to the business and get more focused on the outcome. How can we drive value with IoT? Computer vision's a big part of that. We had an interesting podcast a couple months back with Cisco's global lead for retail, where he's talking about the different information that's gathered around a grocery store, and it's amazing how many different data points there are and how much value that you can get out of those. And then to end on AI, 55% of organizations have some sort of AI project going, which means 45% of organizations just really aren't sure where to start. But as you mentioned, I completely agree. It's one of the points I talk to, keep it simple, start small, find a use case, find a business outcome that you can align with, keep the number of data feeds into that, smaller, and then, experiment. And we're seeing a lot of that experimentation done in the public cloud. So, that's, reach out to CDW, reach out to our partners. That's definitely where we can come in and have those workshops, have those ideation sessions. So thanks, Jim. If you had anything else, feel free to add it. But once again, just really appreciate you jumping in and helping this out.
No, and this is how I live 2 hours north of Toronto, so this is how I socialize. So it was great to talk with you. I got my morning coffee in.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. And thanks again for tuning in to the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I've been your host, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure, joined by Jim Love today of #Trending. Thanks again. Continue to learn, grow, and innovate, and I'll see you on the next podcast.